An integer can be defined as a number or a variable which holds a whole value, and this value can be recognized by not having a decimal part or a fraction part. For example, pi 3.14 is not an integer because it has a decimal part. 1.5 is not an integer because it has a fraction part. However, if we say 10, it is an integer because it doesn't have a decimal point or a fraction. This is the simplest way that Python can recognize the number you enter. On the left side of the screen, you see the Python shell. The Python shell is an interactive screen, so we can enter directly the commands, statements, functions, and we get the response directly. It is powered by the Python interpreter, so any command or statement or function will be interpreted. That means it will be executed by Python 3.11 interpreter. Now, let's start with entering some integer numbers and operations and see how it works. So, for example, if I enter 8, it will respond as 8, so there's nothing different. But if I say 8 plus 3, it will give the response. So for that reason, the Python shell can work easily as a calculator. For example, 6 multiplied by 5 plus 2. So you get the answer. So this is one of the interesting things. If I say a equals to 4, a is a variable, while 8 at the top, for example, is a constant. So 8 represents itself, it's a value. But a saves another value inside. Now, what is the type of a? So in Python, there is a function called type, and as you see, its color changed to purple because it is one of the Python functions. And we give it the object a. When we press enter, class integer. That means a has an integer value. We can calculate from a, b. So we say a plus 3. Again, if we say type b, b is still an integer because addition of two integers gave an integer output. The multiplication, if we say 4, and we check the type, it is integer. However, division is a little bit different because if we use the normal division sign, a by 2, you see that division gave us a non-integer number because it has a decimal point. If we test it, type, you see float. However, in Python, there are two integer special divisions. One is called the integer division with two consecutive division signs. For example, if we say integer division of 5 over 2, it will be 2, not 2.5. The normal or the real division will give us a float number, 2.5. But integer division gives us the integer output or integer result from this division. Another operator called the remainder or the modulus, it gives the remainder of the division, and it is also an integer number because it doesn't have a point. Floating point numbers are the opposite of integers simply because they have a quantity which has a fraction or a decimal point. For example, we can say pi or 3.14 is a floating point number. So for that reason, type of pi, it's a float. Y equals 7 point, and we check the type of y. It is a float. So just by adding the point, we can define a number as a float. If we add a float point number to an integer, and we check, so we see that the output is float, because the float is more general than integer. For example, if we say t equals pi plus 3, so we see this addition kept the decimal part, otherwise it could lead to the loss of data. We have an interesting function in Python which is called round. So round takes the number, let's say round pi. And as you see, round eliminated the decimal part. If we say type round pi, we say it's integer. Round also has an interesting use because we can define the number of decimal points we need for the number. For example, if we say round pi up to only 2 decimal points or decimal digits, it will give us a floating point number. Again, if we check this, the class float.